We'll start. Maybe some late stragglers will come in, but welcome to session 107. So this is how to negotiate your contracts for 2026. We have a lot to go through. The hope is we leave a good 10 minutes or so at the end for you guys to have your questions. If you're able to hold off until then, that'd be really great. Um, so a couple of housekeeping items. There's a yellow piece of paper there that Allison asked for us to ask you to complete, and that is for the show in general. And then there is obviously the housekeeping items on our side. We want you to rate this session. That allows us to get the feedback and hopefully come back again next year. So that's helpful to all of us. And of course, submit your best tip as well. In terms of introductions, I'm Thomas Andersen. My carrier background was DHL Express. I left there as a senior pricing manager in 2007. I was involved in approving and building thousands of carrier contracts while I was there, including contributing towards building the cost models and so forth. In 2007, I left. I joined the side that we're on today, and really just helping companies, shippers, look at their profile, optimize their carriers, optimize their carrier agreements, and so forth. My colleague is Kenneth Moyer, very similar background. He was a pricing manager at UPS. He left the dark side back in 2006 to basically do the same thing that I do, and the same thing we continue to do now. So between the two of us, we've been on this side of the table for 37 years. Combined between our carrier experience and this, we're approaching 60 years of doing exactly what we do here in terms of looking at carrier agreements, so forth. So again, it's probably one of the primary reasons that the people at Parcel allow us to come back and maybe contribute to this subject. So agenda today, quite a bit of content to go through. One, a lot of these sessions are really catered around diversifying the different carriers, which we're huge proponents of. So, when you have the capability to do so, you're able to bring in regionals, more the locals, even switching between UPS and FedEx or having both. Having access to multiple carriers is absolutely critical. So, but for the purpose of today, we're really going to focus primarily on UPS and FedEx. And as we go through the session, I think it becomes really clear why, right? Because post office is pretty straightforward in terms of looking at their NSAs and so forth. Yes, there's a few demand fees and a few accessorials, but the ones that are creating the complexity in the marketplace is UPS and FedEx. And when we deal with shippers on an ongoing basis, and we're typically dealing with about 150 of them on any given point, we probably see on average 5 or 6 new contracts on a daily basis. It's amazing to us how few can really make carrier changes. So even between UPS and FedEx, it can be a tremendous challenge. So in terms of introducing, a regional or multiple other, carriers, we just find that it's becoming incredibly complex. And I think the goal should be for everyone to get to that point. But again, is there the technology in place to allow for multiple carriers? Is infrastructure supporting it? Are you in a location where there's a regional player? So there are all these things that come into place. So you'll see that this is heavily focused towards UPS and FedEx, really for those reasons, and because they're the ones that are continuing to apply the new rate increases, and really sort of creating the most challenging environment. So state of Parcel today, where we are and where we're going. So it continues to be an extremely competitive environment. Again, for those that sat in, maybe raise a hand, Jim Cochran's presentation yesterday about the post office. I mean, that was a fantastic presentation. So he really sort of laid it all out, and obviously the changes that occurred at the beginning of the year between post office and really latter part of last year, and a lot of their partners, and changing sort of the environment and so forth will certainly impact the post office volume this year. But their revenue at least is going up, and I think they have the right infrastructure. Now, going back to creating synergies between UPS, FedEx, and post office. I think he alluded to that as well. I think that's in the best interest of everybody, and hopefully that does occur, because then it does become a more competitive environment again, and so forth. But certainly the emergence of the post office has been a big thing in terms of the carriers sacrificing margins for those that have the information that are able to go and negotiate. We're seeing that on an ongoing basis as well. So, they apply these excessive rate increases that they can really apply to almost everyone, like the masses. And then they're the ones that are able to come and negotiate and be able to make a case for reducing the costs. That's where they're sacrificing margin and so forth. So this just reflects really what we're seeing in terms of the parcel market. I'm guessing you've probably seen 3 or 4 variations of this over the last 24, 36 hours. So, you hear maybe that, okay, things are slowing down and so forth, but really what happened, we go back to the pandemic, 2020, we saw the significant increase in volume that occurred towards the latter part of that time frame. And that continued into 2021. And then it's sort of leveled off since that time frame, right? So the parcel environment is still very healthy. It's the emergence of new players. It's the ability to sort of open that up to, the playground's just bigger at this point. That has all contributed to sort of where we are today. But, you can see the growth is still there. Yes, it's definitely slowed down, but that was expectation, and there's a number of reasons why that's the case, which we'll get to. In terms of market share, and this goes back to, sort of the focus on UPS, FedEx, and FedEx. In terms of market share by revenue, you can see on the left-hand side, for a second here, 65% of the revenue is still tied to UPS and FedEx. Now, Amazon obviously doesn't track it the same way, and so forth. But, still from a revenue perspective, UPS and FedEx is in the clear lead in terms of overall revenue. Now, in terms of the revenue per shipment, you can see that that's leveled off. And more of that is driven by the lower cost providers emerging, even as UPS and FedEx continue to apply their rate increases. Now, in terms of parcel volume, you can see here the pink and the purple reflect UPS and FedEx. So those have very much leveled off in terms of their volume overall. USPS showing an increase last year. Again, pretty much a little bit down this year, but revenue is up, volume slightly down. And then, of course, the one that stands out is Amazon Logistics, which really we anticipated even making more progress at this point in terms of emerging as a viable option. So I think we're just going to continue to see that more and more, obviously. And then the one that's in the far distance here is really, the other players. So they represent a very small amount, but that's where we're seeing the most significant growth, which is what I think we all would anticipate. Just quickly looking at UPS and FedEx's revenue. And this really ties into what Kenneth's really going to get into the most in terms of the opportunities that exist in the marketplace, right? So when we go back to the beginning of the pandemic, so we're looking at the data here going back to Q2 of 2020, things are pretty calm. Let me just make sure I'm looking at this the right way. Yeah, so Q2 of 2020, we're seeing a little bit of that increase. Obviously, we saw that maximize here in the early part of 2021, where we saw volume being up substantially. This is the same time that UPS is going to their larger shippers, giving them brand new agreements, some with 30 or 40% rate increases. You had like 30 days to sign an agreement or move on to list rates. Some of these shippers were able to move on to FedEx, and of course that inundated the FedEx network and so forth. So really through the latter part of 2020 and into most of part of 2021 is when we saw really all these bottlenecks in the and the small parcel space. And then, of course, it levels off, and then we see the decline in revenue. And as we see that at the low point in Q3 of 2023, that's when UPS introduced the Brown program. So there's really a direct correlation to revenue and to volume to how the carriers respond. You couldn't negotiate an effective contract at the end of 2020, early 2021. I mean, it was a real challenge. And then as you got into Q3 of 2023, so 2 years ago, they introduced the Brown program, didn't give you a whole lot in terms of flexibility to negotiate the terms within, but the pricing was phenomenal, right? So there were clients that we had that had negotiated 3 or 4 months prior who went right back and got an additional 15, 20% cost savings as a result of that. And what attributes that was leading up, you had everything in terms of leveling off and so forth. And then you have FedEx starting to approach the UPS shippers as they got closer to the concern for a strike. So slowly, a little bit more volumes, being moved over. You're seeing the emergence of the post office more and more, seeing the emergence of Amazon. So enough volume shifting away. That's this, right? Sorry about that. Enough volume shifting away from UPS to where they really sort of got into desperate mode. And when they do, they put out market-based programs like that, which takes the pricing groups out of the equation and so forth. And at that point, you're changing the entire pricing model. So at that point, we'll look at a slide later on that'll show really what kind of significance that had in terms of the opportunities to negotiate at that point. FedEx, similar results, smaller time frame, but again, just showing that there's a pretty, between once you look at all the service, so forth, pretty much even in terms of their, quarterly yield and so forth. So again, perfect storm contributing, right? So we talked about post office penetrating into the small parcel space, Amazon increasing their presence. We really saw probably beta testing here, I would say maybe 3 years ago. That could be off a little bit, where we saw them going to specific markets. They're still definitely not to the point that they want to get to, but we're seeing more and more, hey, there's an offer from Amazon, or Amazon's interested in working with us directly. I think the biggest concern we have from our clients is now Amazon has visibility to your customer base. And I think that's what makes some a little bit reluctant, right? So Amazon's been somewhat notorious for, and I hope there's no one from Amazon here. I'm not trying to bash them, but just it's part of the reality I guess we're in. You're then put in the position of, hey, look, you're selling a product, and it allows them to see who your client base is, how successful you might be, and so forth. So I think that's the biggest concern that we see from that. Obviously, the further penetration from the regionals and other players. I think OnTrack is one of the great success stories with LaserShip, and sort of how they've really gone from just having a West Coast presence to now, really having a pretty solid presence throughout the entire United States. And then, of course, the retailers, they're driving volume, and rather than relying on carriers to move that product for them, they're finding their own ways to be able to move that product, and can be delivered within an hour. I think there was someone that was on the panel yesterday that talked about drones, and maybe it's the Dallas area, that they're delivering using drones at this point. So other methods of getting the product, which is taking away the traditional small parcel, because it's cheaper, it's more effective, it can get there, same day and so forth. So in terms of the changes, I feel like I'm probably gone through this quite enough at this point, but the typical, maybe shifting gears a little bit, the typical sort of 5.9% increase has gone completely out the door. When we looked at the net impact last year of our typical client base, just based on the increase between accessorials and the transportation charges at the time, going through a traditional GRI analysis, the ones that did not have a rate cap averaged above 7.5%. So the ones that have budgeted for 5.9 already were most likely exceeding that by quite a bit. even those that have a rate cap, that's limited to just base transportation charges. Very rarely is it applied to an accessorials as well. So those accessorials continue to go up. So with that in mind, the 5.9 certainly isn't accurate. I think we would anticipate a 5.9 again this year. There was a year, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 years back where it's 4.9. There was a year where it's 6.9, but the 5.9 is probably what we should anticipate. Personally, I find it interesting how UPS just introduced their demand surcharge really late in the game. And I wonder if this is going to carry into the GRI as well, where they can wait till later in the year to give people less time to be able to negotiate the concessions that they need. So we'll see if, now look, they could announce it tomorrow and you guys are going to say that guy's an idiot. He didn't know what he's talking about. But it's my own speculation that maybe it'll be later on in the year, because it's usually around this time, mid September, that they do announce it, and we'll see if they do or if they're going to push it back. So you're not meant to read all this, but this just shows you the announced rate increases from UPS and FedEx year to date. So there's been 27 instances of rate increases that have been announced by both of them. So this could be the 4 different fuel surcharges. There's one on here in September where FedEx decided, hey, UPS no longer has a relationship with the post office to handle their SurePost. Now they have their ground saver. They applied a full delivery surcharge. We're just going to match it, right? So these are just additional things on top of the GRI, traditional GRI, that have been announced this year. 27 instances between the two of them. And it'll be in the slide deck. And I should also mention, you can give us a business card if you want. We'll send the slide deck to you directly as well after this. And going back to sort of the accessorials versus base transportation charges, if we look at a pre-pandemic situation, this on the left is more reflective of what we typically saw with the majority of shippers. So maybe 80% of your cost was tied to your base transportation charges. 20% may be coming through accessorials, and it could be 20, it could be 30, and so forth. Now, when you look sort of post-pandemic in more recent years, very often it could be a 40-60 split, 60-40 split, one way or another. We have several shippers that we encounter where their accessorials far exceed their transportation charges. And again, it's not the area that's maybe focused on as much. It's an area that they continue to increase and so forth, introduce new ways of applying fees. So there's a pretty good mix there that happens. Second bullet point down just talks about the demand surcharge and the processing fees. So many guys may know, but UPS introduced a credit card surcharge at the beginning of the year, then realized it wasn't applicable. You couldn't apply it by law. So they decided instead we'll introduce a 2% processing fee and just apply it to all, to basically all the bills. So that was their way around. So one of those fees that you can go and typically get waived, see probably a 75% success. So if you're looking for the tip of to take away, you could say, I can get my processing fee waived. The other thing that you want to consider here is the demand surcharges that UPS were waiving going back to the Brown program. Those had asterisks next to them. The majority of those waivers, and what those allow them to do is say at any point without any warning, we can come and remove your waiver on demand surcharges. So about a year ago, heading into the peak of the peak, they decided let's just revoke the waivers on the demand surcharges, and most customers weren't even notified. So all of a sudden they just start seeing the peak surcharges being applied to their bills again. So coming out of this, you got about 3 weeks before the peak season surcharges start to apply, the demand surcharges. Definitely want to approach UPS with that, even if you had a waiver before, because they may not apply it, and just make sure that you have it. This goes back to the savings opportunity based on the market shift. So you'll see here, starting in Q3 of 2023, this is truly an average based on looking our client base. So going into that time frame, 15 to 20% cost savings is pretty common. you go, you do sort of an assessment, you analyze it. Those were the opportunities that existed. That number jumped up to high 20s, low 30s, and it really remained there since. So anyone that hasn't negotiated since 2023 in 2 years, the likelihood is that there's at least 10, 15, 20% savings, but it probably is significantly higher. Now, look, there are some that have really great agreements out there, so you can't put everybody in the same box. But the environment in itself has allowed the opportunities to exist. There's greater opportunities today, even than when you saw this at the highest point. The reason that the results are a little bit lower is because the carriers have become more effective at pushing back. So they're where before they were sort of just buckling and giving it to you and moving on. At one point, there wasn't even pricing involved 2 years ago. Now you see more pushback. So being equipped with the right information is what allows some to have more, greater success than others. But these are the results that we now sort of see over this trend. So the opportunities over the last 2 years are very similar, slightly better today than before, in part because new fees have been introduced and obviously rate increases and so forth. But getting to the finish line, getting to the result is more challenging because of the training that some of these account reps have and so forth. All right, I got to turn it over to Kenneth.
Great. All right, is that good? All right, that gives us a real good foundation for what we want to talk about now. Where we actually go. Is this working all right? Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks. Where we want to go with the actual agreements. So what I'm going to start doing is breaking down some of the parcel agreements, what the carriers are trying to accomplish in those agreements, and ways that we can combat them. So the first thing I want to talk about are some of the trends we're seeing, not only in the carrier pricing, but in their contracts and the way they negotiate. And these are the trends that we want to make sure we're defending against when we negotiate a new agreement. So the first one, and Thomas covered this really well, is the increase in accessorial charges, right? From an average of 20% of your spend to now 40%. So this area needs a lot more attention and a lot more defense in new parcel contracts than it ever had to before. The second thing is the carriers have really adopted this strategy of changing pricing, introducing new fees, or changing fee application methodology to do one of two things: increase revenue or change your behavior, right? So they've created an interesting situation and a good one for their business, which is they're either going to get more revenue from you or get you to do something they want you to do. So the demand surcharges are the perfect example of this. So they don't want to deliver any more packages in December, right? They got plenty. So by introducing the peak surcharge, they're telling you, well, if you're going to give it to us anyway, or if you're going to give us this package, we're going to charge you more for it. Now, they're not delivering it any faster. They're not delivering it any further. They're doing the same thing they always did. They're just getting more revenue. Or you may make the decision that I can't afford that. So that replenishment move that I used to do in December, now I'm going to do it in September, right? I'm going to do it earlier now to avoid the fee, right? So they create this win-win scenario where either they get more revenue or they get you to do something different. And then lastly, we really see the market moving toward more of these to almost where we get to surge pricing or dynamic pricing. So think of how hotels price, right? If Taylor Swift's coming to town, you're going to pay more for that hotel room than if she's not, right? So right now we see the surge pricing. I wouldn't mind, or the peak pricing. I wouldn't be surprised to see it cost more to ship on Valentine's Day. It costs more to ship on Mother's Day. Probably not Father's Day. We don't get that much, but the point is it can change depending on the time of year, or it could even get so granular. For example, Monday is always the carrier's busiest day of the week. They may start charging you more to ship on a Monday than a Thursday. So that's coming. So we want to prepare in our negotiation environment and the contracts for these changes that are coming. Okay, so now I want to talk about some specific contract elements. And of course, we don't have anywhere near enough time to go through a whole UPS or FedEx agreement. But I just want to hone in on the areas that are either most confusing or that are really dangerous, right? So I want to start with what we call the self-regulating portion of a UPS or FedEx contract, where the more you ship, the more discount you get, the less you ship, the less discount you get. So this is what a FedEx one looks like. FedEx terms it their earned discount, right? So you can see the discounts based on how much they ship. UPS has the same thing, but they call it their portfolio tier. Now, right away, you'll notice the UPS number is a weekly rolling average, whereas the FedEx number is an annual figure. So right away, it's hard to compare the two, right? The next thing to notice is that these are based on gross transportation charges. So first of all, that's pre-discount. And secondly, transportation charges does not include all of your accessorials. So what I hear all the time is a CFO or a controller will say, I wrote checks for this much, but I'm not in that tier. Well, because they're using a gross number, you paid a net number, and you've paid all of your charges, they're not including them all. So you can't use what you pay to correlate the tier you should be in. That's the most common frustration that I hear. Both contracts at the end will have this committed services section, which defines for you the fees that are included in the calculation versus which ones are not, right? So if you want some help understanding that, that'll help. The next thing that causes a lot of confusion, and I'm going to focus on ground right now because that's the dominant service level usage in the market. And this is a UPS example. So for you to determine your ground rate, there are 3 separate elements that you have to blend together to get there. So the top element is what we just talked about, that performance element. So based on how much you ship, you get a discount. So let's use the 5th tier there. So you see 12%. So if they're shipping in that area, they get 12%. But below that, and in conjunction to this, there's also a discount in this fixed grid, right? So this is based on the zone and weight of the package, not how much you ship, right? So if we look at this section here, if we ship a zone 6 1-pounder, that's 23%. So you would take the 23 and add it to the 12, you have a 35% discount. But you have to add those two together. That creates a lot of confusion for folks. Then the last element is the minimum. So for every package you ship UPS or FedEx, there's a package minimum charge that they apply. So even if you had a 100% discount, you'd still pay for every package because you have to pay that minimum. And you have to understand all 3 of these elements to come up with your rate. And you have to negotiate the minimum with the discount, because if you don't adjust the minimum down to accommodate the discount you just negotiated, especially if you have low weight, low zone packages, the minimum will constrain that discount. And even though you have a 35% discount, you won't actually get that. You might end up with a 22% discount because of the minimum. So all these things need to be done in conjunction. The other thing I want to point out is, if possible, when you're negotiating, that middle discount, right, the rates that you have in the middle, they're non-dependent on how much you're shipping. So the more of your discount you can get in that grid, the better, because it's not at risk if your shipping goes down, right? Everything at the top is at risk if your shipping declines, but anything in the middle grid is not. So the more of your discount you can get in the grid portion, the better it'll be for you. Okay, accessorials. We talked about this a little bit. This is just a partial list of all the accessorials you can get hit with. So when you're negotiating, before you begin that RFP process, you need to understand which one of these do I get hit with regularly, because some of these may not apply to you at all, so don't spend any time on them. Which ones do you regularly get assessed, and at what financial level? So now you know when you go into the negotiation, these are the ones I need to mitigate. I see people all the time arguing and trying to negotiate ones that are $400 a year, and they forget the one over here that's $18,000 a year. So focus where your dollars are focused. All right, now I want to talk about terms and conditions. This is where people really get themselves in trouble. And I've seen it 100 times. Somebody gets handed a UPS contract, what's the first thing you do? Flip through the first 5 pages of terms and conditions to get to the discount, right? Well, those 5 pages can be pretty painful, right? So we really want to focus on those. So let me talk about some of the ones you want and some of the ones you don't want. So T's and C's that you want to pursue, things like extended payment terms. The longer you can hold on to your money, the better. Rate cap protection. Thomas already talked about that. If you have a rate cap, it'll retard the growth of your rates over years. Rebates, credit card payments. These are all things that are valuable to you that you can get added to the terms and conditions. On the other side, these are the terms and conditions you don't want to have. And I'm going to talk about almost all of these in a little more detail. But this is kind of an inventory of some of the ones you really want to avoid. So I'm going to talk about how some of those can affect you. So we talked about the rate cap, and the rate cap is a really valuable thing to have, right? It prevents the full rate increase from hitting you in the future. Well, here's a shipper that had a rate cap language, but there were two strings attached, and those two strings were pretty significant. The first is a revenue commitment. So what the carrier said was, you can have your rate cap, but in order to get the rate cap, you have to give us this much in revenue over the course of the year. Well, that might seem fair, except for the fact that this customer's never shipped this $7 million in their entire history. So as soon as they signed that contract, they were not going to get this. Not only that, the calculation for this, you'll see it's annualized transportation charge. Well, what is it not? The calculation we just talked about. So you could qualify for the portfolio tier and not qualify for this because they use entirely different calculations. So a lot of folks think, oh, I'm getting my top tier on my portfolio tier, I must be hitting this level. Not necessarily, right? Completely different numbers. The second string is a price index impact. So what this basically says is the CPI index, or essentially inflation, is greater than 3%. We don't have to honor the rate cap. Well, for quite a while now, we've been at or above that level. So even this customer was very happy to have a rate cap, and there were two provisions, and both of them took it away. So you need to make sure there's either no strings attached, or the strings attached are ones that are not going to take it away from you. Now this one, expiring terms, this is probably the most dangerous financial term and condition we run across on a regular basis. So this one's really important. So a typical UPS FedEx agreement is in effect for 3 years, 36 months, right? That's their average agreement, 36 months. However, each term within the contract may not last that entire 36 months. So even though the contractual skeleton or framework lasts for 3 years, it doesn't mean every piece does. So what you see here is this contract's broken into two terms. Term 1 lasts 24 months and then initiates term 2. So if you look at the bottom here, term 1, this client has 50 to 100% discount on a whole multitude of accessorial charges. But in term 2, they have nothing. It's gone. Your contract's still there, but all your accessorial charges are gone. We hear repeatedly where a shipper will approach us and say, our cost went up 30 or 40%, and we're not doing anything different. We don't know why. This is usually the culprit. So either don't allow this in your contract, or set 7 reminders in Outlook to call them 3 months before this happens, right? Because you don't want to have this happen to you, because trying to get it reinstated can be a real challenge. And I'm using an accessorial example. It's not limited to accessorials. It can apply to your DIM charges. It can apply to your rate caps, rebates, everything. Okay, so this is one I take personally. Minimum commitments and early termination fees. So what the carriers will build into a lot of contracts today are these clauses that say, if your revenue drops below a certain threshold, or you try to cancel our contract, terminate our contract, or if you put our contract out for bid, we can fine you. Which I don't even know whoever came up with this, but you'll see the main problem with this is it's completely one-sided. So they can raise your rates 100%. They can deliver none of your packages on time. And yet, if you try to remedy that situation by leaving, they'll fine you. So don't let this get into your contract. And if you do, come talk to me. We'll talk about how to get out of it. But this is really, really dangerous, because what it will do is it could create a situation where you want to get out of it, but you can't. All right, some current pricing trends that we see. So the carriers, as Thomas mentioned, are still being very aggressive. So it's a good time to negotiate. USPS has really kind of disrupted that lower portion of the market, the lightweight portions, and the thing that still drives the greatest savings is carrier consolidation, right? Carrier consolidation is still going to drive the greatest level of savings. So what determines your rate? So when a UPS pricing manager sits down, or a FedEx pricing manager sits down to come up with their contract, what do they look at? So here are the things that or determine your rate. So cost and profitability, which of course go together, and you can affect those. All these other items you necessarily can't affect, and you may not even know. Things like asset utilization, right? Or where are they to their business plan? So for example, if they're 80% to their business plan, they're going to be more aggressive to try to gain market share. If they're 105% to their business plan, they're going to be less aggressive to protect yields, right? So all these things affect the discount you get, but you can't affect them, and a lot of times you can't even know them. So I always like to say there's an art and a science to carrier pricing, right? The science is the science of cost, right? It's about your characteristics, about their cost to serve you. The art part is about the market. What's the market perception? What are their competitors doing, and so forth. So we want to make sure when we negotiate, we push on things that have lots of margin, and we don't push on things that don't have lots of margin. So a good example is things like adult signature required. So the reason the carriers charge for that is because they need to. There's a lot of cost involved when, hey, the UPS driver comes up, hey, can you get your mom or dad to sign for this? There's cost involved. So they need to charge for that. So can you push on that? Yeah, but not a lot. But something like residential surcharges, right? Back when I was in UPS pricing when they introduced it. So I'm sorry. But it made sense then, because that UPS driver would be in an office park, have to leave the office park, go deliver one package in a neighborhood, and then come back to the office park. Now they're delivering more packages in the neighborhood than they are in the office park. So the density has increased, which pushes the cost down. But what's happened to the fee? Keeps going up. So there's a lot of margin there. You can push on that. All right, so what's negotiable and what's not? I hear people all say all the time, oh, I'd love to reduce my fuel, but I know I can't negotiate it. Not true. Every letter, every number is negotiable if you have the leverage. And what creates the leverage are these four things. Your volume, scale is the most important thing. The competitive environment, what are their competitors doing? Your profitability and your relationship with the carrier, right? So you can push on everything in a contract if you've got the leverage to do so. Okay, so I got two sets of takeaways I want you to go away with. So the first is in conducting and managing your RFP process. So the first thing to remember is you can negotiate at any time. You do not have to wait to the end of the term of your contract. Just like they don't wait to raise your rates, you don't have to wait to renegotiate. And in fact, waiting to the end is a really poor strategy, because if your opening salvo to the carrier is, hey, my contract's expiring, we should probably talk about it, you've created no leverage and no urgency. In fact, you've signposted you're really okay with what you got. You don't want to do that, right? So you can negotiate at any time. Number two, the value flexibility trade-off. As Thomas talked about earlier, the introduction of regionals and having multiple carriers. So if you do that, it's great because it creates operational redundancy and flexibility, but you will not get the best rate. So before you start your RFP, you have to decide what's the most important. Am I willing to lose that flexibility and redundancy in order to get a better price? Or am I willing to give up the best price to get more redundancy? And that's just something you got to decide before you start. Next, the cost of being uninformed. So it is critical that either you can or you find someone that can help you quantify what every contract proposal means, because the carriers will often give you a contract, tell you it's better. They might even give you an analysis with the contract. 9 times out of 10, it's wrong. And if you cannot tell them it's wrong, then they know you can't analyze it and you will not win that negotiation. You have to be able to quantify and tell the difference if their analysis is inaccurate. And then lastly on this is, and I'm sorry to do this, but I got to set the right expectations. You got to gird yourself for this, right? A typical negotiation with the carriers will go 3 to 6 rounds. I mean, you have to get 3 to 6 different proposals. and it will usually take 6 to 10 weeks. So like get the Gatorade, get 2 coffee machines, like get ready, because it's not easy. And it's not easy for a reason, because they know the longer it goes, the more painful it is, the more likely you are to give up or to settle. And we don't want you to settle, right? So get ready. And then lastly, when you're communicating with the carriers, there's a couple principles that really have proven effective over time. First is the team approach, meaning whoever is the point of contact with the carrier should never be the decision maker. At least they should not know that person is the decision maker, because you need to give that person space. They need a safety valve so that if the carrier says, if I do this, will you sign? You can say, I don't know, I got to check with the team, right? That gives you a safety valve so that you can go back and analyze and think about it. You can't be put on the spot. Second is stay on message, because a lot of times the carriers are going to want to talk to you about value adds and relationships, and all that's fine and good, but you want to keep the conversation always coming back to price, right? You want to keep it back on price. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time talking about co-branded packaging and you won't save any money. Next is how you and when you say things really matters. Every conversation, every communication you have with the carrier needs to be intentional. You need to think about it. Every email, every conversation, every offhanded comment has to have a purpose, and you have to guard your information well, right? And the tone, everything you use is important. For example, if you use an aggressive kind of upset tone from beginning to end, it loses its effectiveness. You need to use it at the right time, right? Same thing. I have a lot of Midwest customers that struggle with being too nice. If you're too nice the whole time, that's not going to help you either. So you have to adapt to the situation. And it's really important. And then the very last thing is what you do now in this negotiation will either pay dividends or it will cost you the next time and the time after that and the time after that. So building the right foundation of communication, professionalism, and respect now will pay dividends in the future. And we try to set up a scenario where we train the carriers, just like you might train your children. If you do what I want, you get rewarded. If you do what I don't like, you get punished, right? So if we ask for something and you provide it, you'll get rewarded for that. You'll get a prize. If we ask for something, you don't give it to us, you'll get punished for that. And when you set that expectation and that training early, it will pay dividends in almost every interaction you have with them going forward. So that's what I wanted to cover. I hope that was helpful. Please do your survey when you leave, if you don't mind. And we do have a couple of minutes for questions if anybody has any. Or you can grab us in the hallway when we're done as well. And as Thomas mentioned, if you want the present, we actually had to strip this down to fit it. We can send you a full presentation that has some additional data. If you want it, just give me your business card before we go.
I want.
Okay, just give us your business card. We'll send it to you. Yeah, I saw a lot of you trying to take pictures. It'd be a lot easier to just get it. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I heard in today all of you guys talk about, contract negotiation, the Kujain, DTS, FedEx, accessorial down of the pay. Now we're talking for the food aid down to listen to contract negotiation. We all know that they both have lost quite a bit of money. And we heard from different experts that, they're devamping. One is called 3.0 future here in DTS and at the South Gate. Basically, that have to figure out because if they keep it like that, the cost is going up. And I get in the con code up, everybody talks about it, you have to go to the consumer, the end user, and try and recover. How to be justified that? The volume is down, economy is bad, and here we talk about it, and yes, we're going to find out, what's going to happen is going to happen. They're not going to find a solution tomorrow. But what I've been watching is that we keep on talking about 4.9% increase, 5.9% increase, whatever that happened to be, and the history is there. So, we are not making up something. Why can't we talk about it and say, okay, let's, all the shippers, get ourselves into this mind frame and say, okay, how are we going to get increases? A lot of companies that are making money, a lot of them are, trimmers, downsize, going out of business, So based on that, the increases are not healthy. So is there any trend in the future that we could do something in these port shops to talk about it that really help the shippers and especially the small businesses, that if you keep on hawking, I feel like
Can you, what is it that you want to know?
I want to know is that what can we do? How can we get the, contracts where I'm saying is that you don't want any increase? What suggestions do you have? How do we go about it? We also talk about accessorial, the DAS, and dimensions and what they're doing.
Yeah, you and the carriers have ulterior motives, right? So their goal is to continue to apply the rate increases, apply it to 90, 95, 98% of their shippers and have an increasing stick rate and make their profitability that way. And then the companies like ours are trying to equip those that are interested with the ability to at least come back and offset those increases over a period of time. The reality is you're going to deal with so you can save money. And then it's really about trying to contain those costs or utilizing the other carriers that are out there and so forth. But it's a vicious battle, for sure.
You think that these shells have the capacity if these blue giants I don't know.
Yeah, it's all going to improve. I think this conversation is going to be entirely different in 2 years, in 4 years, in 6 years. If we're speaking on this topic, I think the topic is in itself is going to be half the time spent on UPS and FedEx and probably more time on the regionals. I mean, if you go back 5 years, OnTrack did not apply, hey, we only apply demand fees. We don't do the accessorials. They do now, maybe not to the same level, but this is going to happen with everybody, right? So you find your way into a market and then you're going to still find ways to maximize profits. I mean, almost everyone here, their business is trying to identify ways to improve their profits. So, and we can speak about it maybe afterwards too, but there's a question over here, Joe. Sir, did you?
Yeah, how did you find RFPs at your part? Seems like, said years ago that RFP, it's smaller carrier, Ecopario, and then a couple of these call it that import. Now with their barrier, custom exchange, that's much more effective just to abandon the RFP.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends partially on your corporate culture. And secondly, how the level of kind of your contract is. So we run RFPs for companies that are a lot more sophisticated. Now, the advantage we have is we also know exactly what the end result should be. So we're not going out there and just saying, hey, I hope this carrier is cheaper than this carrier. We know where they should all be when we start. So we know what the end result should be. And it's really who's going to get there first, right? So having that kind of background, that information of what the market is really helpful when you start the RFP.
Your typical negotiation process, whether it involves an official RFP or not, is going to move in the approach of now you provided this. These are the additional concessions I'm looking for. The basis for that can vary, but ultimately that's where it goes. And whether that's through one additional step in terms of doing an RFP, and if you're historically a global firm, if you're Fortune 100, if your spend's a certain amount, that would probably align more with your culture than if you're a mid-market shipper. It would be sort of awkward to launch an RFP. But what you would do traditionally would align with the way you do things going forth. And if that involves, putting out an RFP and waiting a month for proposals, that's okay.
Do you foresee contract negotiations or evaluations changing as AI comes more into the space of digesting data and providing a feedback more accessible to people?
You want to phrase the question? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, and we already know that the carriers use AI to do a lot of their pricing, right? So they're becoming a little more sophisticated, but also a little more uniform in how they're doing some of that pricing. So we use a lot of machine learning and parcel intelligence to combat that on the data side, because their goal going in is always to know more about your shipping than you do. And you need to make sure that that's not the case, right? That you're equally defended against that. But there's still a lot of pricing variation, like we talked about, based on geography, based on industry. So I don't know that it's going to completely normalize even with introducing AI.
And I think most experts, the ones that have built the tools, are going to, you stay away from AI, right? Because you don't want to feed the system. From our perspective, we don't want to feed the system with confidential information, right? So we're very cognizant about what information we share through the AI environment and not. And in terms of the tools and so forth, AI does not have the tools to be able to take take your data as much as you want to read about it and say, yeah, you can dump data in, it's going to analyze, so forth. It's not going to be able to take, at least currently, a UPS and a FedEx contract, run it against your data and give you an accurate result. We're not there yet. And a company like ours, we're not going to feed it to get to that level either. Maybe there are some that will, and maybe we'll get there in the next 3, 5, 10 years. I don't know, but it's complex enough. There's so much involved in those for something to be able to decipher it accurately and apply it correctly. And with the reluctance, I think, again, of people wanting to share that level of their information, right? So now if you share your UPS data and the FedEx data, you're now sharing your customer base with an environment that basically you have to treat as, now the globe has access to this. What can they do with that information? And personally, I feel like that's one of the things that's sometimes ignored through AI, where, you read about things and so forth, and it sounds sexy. Like, hey, look, just throw it through AI. But at the, and like building an RFP is fantastic, right? It's easy. Hey, look, create a 10-page RFP document for small parcels, go to UPS and FedEx. 5 minutes, you're pretty much done. And you're not sharing information. But data, pricing, those things become more of a concern.
So the increase in costs is generally passed to the customer. What strategies can enterprise use to lessen this burden on the end consumer? Should they split it between their profitability and consumer? What are you seeing in the market? Are they passed on or?
Yeah. So the question is, typically shipping costs are passed through to the customers. And I think that's a very mixed result. I mean, you see some where we have a whole other session probably on that, where flat rate pricing, should you charge someone in a zone 8 differently than someone in a zone 2? Shouldn't you punish them because they're, 2,000 miles away? So I think there are a lot of different things there. Are we still, looking at free shipping? Are there more and more that are maybe charging a small upcharge and then be able to benefit from maybe a 2-day service? There's an additional $7 cost to you, but you can recoup maybe $15 that way. I think there are a lot of different ways that people certainly take when it comes to that. The biggest thing we see is that, people want to obviously find all the different options that exist that are reliable, consistent. And I think that's where UPS and FedEx continue to come into play. It's the two consistent carriers. As much as anyone else that's been around here for the last 2 days will say, it's the two carriers that are the most consistent that can get your shipments anywhere in this country in a matter of the time frame that you want. And it's really limited to those two. There's no one else currently that can do the same thing. So that's why they continue to be in the realm of things. And the reality is they've established these contracts where, yeah, if you start shifting volume away, we're going to find ways to punish you because you're committed to these revenue bands and so forth. And so there are a lot of things that come into play for sure, but it's about cost reduction and then cost containment to a certain extent. And then be able to see, hey, look, can I bring in other carriers and so forth? So I think we've gone over our time, but yeah.
All right, well, thank you everybody for coming.
Out in the back, if outside, if anyone wants to swing by and ask anything else, but appreciate your time. Thank you.